Hi, Henning and MJ from FlippedNormals.com. We are going to take you through how we sculpted this clicker from The Last of Us, inspired by the clickers from the TV series. So let's get straight into it.
Yeah, I think they have an incredible design, like this whole mashup of mushrooms and people monstery feel. It makes for an interesting sculpt.
It's really cool design. I was looking at a lot of references for how they actually did it, and was able to find some really cool reference from, I think, from the official makeup artists who were doing it. So I follow that quite religiously. Starting off in ZBrush, just from a sphere. Everything in this video is from a sphere. Like it's a very simple sculpt. Simple, not easy, in the sense that it's still a really hard sculpt to do. But from a technical point of view, everything here, apart from the teeth, which will come from a base mesh, is straight up from just a sphere. What I'm thinking about now when I'm making this one is that clickers and characters like this, they're just humans. Like in this sense, they're literally humans. Like they were straight up humans who were transformed. But even if you're making something more monster-like, it's still very helpful to consider it first a human and then you monsterify it, because that way you can make sure that the anatomy at least is somehow plausible, and that's just gonna make everything so much easier.
I think that's actually something you can extrapolate to anything you do design-wise, even if it's, you know, quadrupedal as well. Start your base in something known anatomy, or like known anatomy, and then you can start to break it afterwards. Same thing goes with these, like starting with the face that we understand, that we know, and then we can start to place mushrooms on top or make it really nasty looking.
Yeah, we're really just creating a very rough, like a human, where we can place the fungi stuff on top of it. Whenever I'm sculpting as well like this, I always find it to be very helpful to break it into like two main stages, which is get the anatomy right and then design it. Just by doing this, you can really simplify the process a lot, because design is really hard and anatomy is really hard, and often you're confusing the two. You're often having issues that you think are design issues, but actually they're just anatomy issues.
I think that's just a shameless plug. That's where our new face VDMs over on FlippedNormals.com they're actually really helpful, because they allow you to, for the most part, skip the whole thinking and doing a lot of the base work and just jump in straight to the design. Obviously, we're not using that here because it's the challenging sculpt anything from a sphere. But as a general principle, I think they work really well for that.
Yeah, funny you mention it, because like where the teeth here actually come from the face VDMs. That's one of the many base meshes. But in terms of the actual VDMs themselves, this is all just sculpted by hand. It's so useful to have like base meshes for teeth, because it takes a long time to do, and honestly it's just tricky to get right. Either
sculpt a pair yourself or find a really good set of teeth and then never worry about teeth again.
For this as well, I split the teeth just down in the center, because this is a very integral part to the clicker design, where the whole skull is just split in the center. And this also becomes really important when we're adding the mushroom bits as well, because this is where all the fungi is actually coming from. Like I imagined that it comes like from like the brain, or like at least from the core. I have no idea how this actually works anatomically. I just looked at cool concept art. I didn't think more about it than that. But at least it's just thinking about structurally how does it work. That was really important for this.
Yeah, when I've looked at either references for clickers, I sort of get the same feel, right? That it all grows from a very central point, like, I don't know, right down the middle of the brain or something, and then it just protrudes out the nose, the mouth, and it sort of slowly break through, kind of like you see with plants that grow through asphalt. Right, slowly they just make their way up, and then they just split everything.
For doing these kind of fungal bits, this was a big part of the sculpt, so I had to actually figure out how to do it. And I was really thinking about how on earth do we actually create this. I was thinking about like making VDM brushes or IMM brushes or something like that. But in the end, I honestly think the easiest solution here was straight up just sphere deformed with the move brush, and then sculpted with the clay buildup brushes, and then just deform this. It's one of these where it takes, like there's probably like a smarter way of doing this, but this doesn't actually take that much time, and it looks really good at the end because you control everything.
I think that's an interesting thing that I observed some years back when I was watching, I think it was some videos from Rafael Grassetti as well as comments that countless comments that we've gotten over the years on our videos, that there's always a faster, better, easier, more technical approach to things. Why don't you use array mesh for this kind of thing? Why don't you use a specific brush in a certain way? And there might be legitimate reasons for doing that, but I find for the most part, maybe it's a very old guy mentality to have regarding it. But like the base stuff, the base way of doing it is usually faster. I mean, it's great to learn new techniques to figure out how do I actually optimize this if it's something that you do regularly. But for a lot of organic sculpting, a sphere with Dynamesh is usually an amazing approach.
For this, from here on, everything is just sphere with Dynamesh. It's also interesting as well from this on as well, from this point onwards, the whole thing is asymmetrical. Like we're not using symmetry at all. So getting to the base to this point, like the actual face base here or the head base, that was done with symmetry, but from here on, it's all asymmetrical. And this has been a question I keep getting, like when do you break symmetry? Because I prefer to work a lot with symmetry or without symmetry. It really depends on from sculpt to sculpt, but particularly if you're making something gnarly like this, like some kind of crazy monster, it's really useful to break symmetry often, though with the massive caveat that if you're in a production, then don't do this, because you really want the character to be topologically symmetrical as much as possible. So if you're a concept artist and you're just thinking, oh, this looks super cool, yeah, you're messing stuff up for the modeling department. So try to make it as symmetrically as you can. In this case here, what I would have done I would have made the base shape here be as symmetrical as humanly possible. Try to build it off humanoid base mesh so the studios can use in-house base meshes, and then have all the asymmetry be in the teeth and in the fungal elements and all that. So it still looks symmetrical, while at the same time topologically the model is still nice and symmetrical. Makes it much easier to build for everyone.
I think from a design point of view, when you look at a clicker or this kind of zombie, I guess, it's what comes to mind is that the base design, the base head, is not the challenging or striking part of the design. What you really start to notice is all the, is it called flowers? Or like, I don't know, it's not flowers, but like where the mushrooms actually, they come out of, and those leaves of the mushrooms, whatever they're called, that's the tricky design bit, right? Like the jaw that we see here, the teeth, the tongue, are fairly simple elements. Even the neck and the upper body there, fairly simple elements. But where it gets exciting is that interplay between the different mushrooms, how they grow, how they fan out from the head. So I think if someone watching this wants to sculpt their own, that's really where they should put a lot of their effort. Figure out how to get that to flow nicely.
It's also a masterclass, really. Like the designer is really a masterclass in how do you do something interesting. Like zombies, when The Last of Us 1 came out, the zombies had been done for a very long time. But this was like the first time I felt it was like truly fresh. They were not just like undead and all that. It was based around spores and around like fungal infections. So when you had a massive zombie, it just wasn't like a quote unquote monster. It was somebody who was very much in a real way infected with mushrooms. And design-wise, that makes it so much more interesting. If this guy here was just a zombie, it just would have been a human with like fleshy bits and all that. But now he's basically like a hybrid between an actual mushroom and between a human, which makes it very interesting.
I think you can kind of draw, an analogy to villains in a lot of comic book related stuff or silly films where they're evil just because they're evil, right? Okay, if you're evil because you're evil and you just want world domination, it's really hard for the viewer to engage. I think the same thing holds true for design. If they're just a zombie and they're just re-dead, undead, whatever it is, it's hard to ground that in reality. I think that's what The Last of Us, they do really well, is that it is grounded in something that is plausible. And it, with the whole parasitic spores and makes ants, I don't know, be zombies and I don't know what actually they do, but like the whole spores, the way they grow out of them, I think that's why this kind of design works so well, that it's not just a zombie that's alive, someone who's dead who's now alive. There's a reason for it being sort of reanimated.
And there's so much cool stuff you can do as well. Like you have the, you know, obviously in the game, you need to have gameplay aspects as well. You need to have the base low level zombie, then you need to have stronger ones and all that. But it works really well because of the world building they have, where they can be like, well, this guy has been infected for longer with this plant, so, or the fungi, so he's just much stronger or very different in a very unique way. So I think it becomes so much more interesting. We've been talking about this a fair few times before, like the whole like how do you reference characters, and if you're referencing like mushrooms like this and zombies at the same time, you get something just unique instead of just the like standard Night of the Living Dead undead kind of characters. The footage here as well is also around 250%, so like 2.5 times faster, and the whole thing is around 3.5 hours as well. So now we're probably at around the 1 hour and 15 minute mark or something like that. So I think it's important as well when you're looking at this that this is like more of a highlight, that the boring parts have kind of been cut out. It wasn't just that the mushroom parts here didn't just magically pop up. It's repetitive, so we cut this off from the video, and just know that this just takes a long time to do in terms of the repetition as such. It's just put on your headphones and just do this kind of stuff. Just don't rush any of these parts, particularly the mushroom parts. You really just have to make sure that they're working.
Yeah, it's like an Instagram post with a filter on. You know, you didn't see the other 12 posts that we deleted because they didn't look great.
Yeah, and also you didn't see the 17 years of sculpting in ZBrush as well to be able
yeah,
to
there's that
sculpt something like this.
I think something really nice to note here is sort of the way that the mushrooms, they get volume, especially the ones at top on the top of his head, is that lip, the outside lip of the mushroom. What Henning has done is sort of enlarge that to almost delineate something that's organic, and that really, you know, draws in your eye a lot more than if it was just like a plain surface that then goes out and then disappears into nothing. Giving it that extra bit of volume really helps, I think.
Yeah, I'm really trying to integrate the mushrooms as well, particularly like the neck mushroom. So you can see there is like the lip around it as well. So really thinking about these as, like thinking about it in a more holistic way, where it's not just mushrooms and then it's a character. No, the things, they go deep into him. Like imagine how much pain this would cause you, and just medically how much of a nightmare this would be to deal with, and how infected it could be, like just how nasty this could actually be. We'll probably make a video texturing this guy as well. That's something I'm currently working on at the moment, and for that I'm always thinking about how to actually, like, how would these integrate? Would they bleed in these areas, or what color would there be and all that? So it's all connected. Imagine
how wild people would go if you textured this in Mari. I mean, I know it's not happening in Mari, but just imagine, Henning.
What is Mari, Morten? I don't know. I've never heard of that software before. Yeah, we've been talking about maybe actually doing some Mari tutorials at some point as well. But you know, I'm enjoying Painter. Painter is fun. But yeah, we should probably do some Mari tutorials at some point as well.
I think we've been talking about it for like 5 years, 6 maybe.
Yeah, I think we have. At this point as well, what I'm doing is like the design is kind of resolved at this point, not fully, but we're not going to be adding a whole lot of new stuff to it. So at this point, I just zero mesh the model, like duplicated, zero mesh, and then like project it back. There's a cool semi-new feature in ZBrush called History Project, so I prefer to use a History Project instead of the normal project, and just reproject all the stuff and then subdivide it. Now around 3 million polygons for this, and at this point, I just go over the whole model again. This takes some time. There's just no shortcuts here. There's no way to, like, if you just were to add alphas and such at this point, VDMs and all that, it's just not going to work properly. You really, really have to just go over the whole model and just refine the whole thing. This is kind of relating to a discussion we'll do in another video fully, but essentially, the foundation for like good texturing is really good sculpting. Like when I'm actually texturing this guy now, it's so much easier to texture this guy because the sculpting is good. You can tile a lot of stuff across him. You can extract like really good like ambient occlusion and cavity maps and curvature and all that. So it's so much easier to texture something that's properly sculpted. If you have good mid frequency, texturing something is is like twice as easy to do. And just going over everything with clay buildup, I think it's really important. Like one of the core things I want to get across in this video is clay buildup, a sphere, Dynamesh, Dam Standard, the Move Brush. With those tools, you can really do anything. Like you can make any character from any movie in any game, essentially. And then the next component is headphones and a lot of time. And from there on, you can really make anything. There's no magical brush here. These are the brushes I use for the vast majority of all my characters.
Like if you wanted to be really crazy, I think like really limit yourself. I think Move Brush and clay buildup, and then your smooth brush. I think you could do everything with that. Some things would be harder, but you could try, like do like a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically just how I'm working as well. The only thing I'm actually adding to that would be the Dam Standard. And like now I'm just using the Dam Standard, going over it, adding some creases and all that. But like really, like it's all just about sculpting technique. Trying to go across the shapes as well, and really trying to make these, like the lines here, not just be apparent everywhere. You don't want everything to have texture. You want to be a little bit careful with it. It's kind of like line quality if you're drawing as well. You just want to control it quite a lot.
I think one of the things I like so much about the clay buildup is that it's such a versatile brush. You can, you know, disable the alpha, have a nice and soft brush where you can build up a lot of volume, re-enable your alpha, make the brush smaller, and that allows you to create these really crusty and hard looking pieces on top of your character, even rocks. And you can vary some of the alphas to have something in between. I think it's just such a powerful brush. I tend to use it for 90% of everything I sculpt, I think.
So if you're asking yourself what brush should I use in ZBrush, this is a good question. You know, you need to know that as well. The answer is just very simple. It's clay buildup and then experiment with the alpha. Like you can really see here how much time I'm spending on like the mid frequency. The mid frequency is kind of like in between like the really high frequency, like the pores and all that, and it's in between the like between that and like the core anatomy. I'm also thinking here about like the story elements. Like this guy was probably bitten at some point, and then I'm just trying to think, where would the bite be? Maybe he's been attacked by some other infected as well, and just trying to add some of this. And since it is a Henning sculpt, he needs some scars for sure. But here is actually justified since it's an actual zombie, right?
Implying that previous characters, it's not justified. They're just there because they're scars.
Yes. I think it's really handy to sculpt without symmetry for this. Like it just looks so much better. It takes, of course, longer. It doesn't take twice as long, I think, but it takes much longer. But it really looks much better. If this here was sculpted with symmetry, it would just, you would have to do so much in like texturing to break up the symmetry, and use the move brush to make it more lopsided or something. But it's very hard.
Because there's detail that you don't, I feel, naturally would sculpt. If you have a symmetrical model, you make him lopsided or shift part of the design, and then you start to sculpt. Like if you do it, I mean, as early as you can without breaking anything in production and stuff as well, of course. But the earlier you can get that in from a design point of view, the more organic and the more natural it feels.
I'm just going over these ones as well. It's so important to get this stuff right. It's one of these things, like I'm currently like doing like the more look and shading for this guy, you know, behind the scenes. But some of the parts that need more work is no texturing. It's these parts here, because obviously you can't spend all your time on these ones because it would just take a very long time. But you can just see that instead of like improving the diffuse or color map or diffuse or roughness or something, it's just sculpting. It just needs better sculpting. And that's what I'm trying to like proactively fix at this point. Just make the sculpting interesting, and everything else will be so much better.
I think you could also be selective with your details here, the same way you can on the face, for example, where you don't need wrinkles everywhere. You don't need to really carve in with Damien standard everywhere. The same thing could apply to the mushrooms here. If you wanted to be a little more economical with your time, for example, you could choose to focus on the things that are closer to the center of the face, where you actually want the viewer to look, and maybe leave the ones at the top or at the sort of far edges of the character, leave them a little softer to sort of draw the attention on the actual character, not the periphery of the character.
It's a really good idea to do that in general. It's kind of like having depth of field when you're rendering or taking a photo where stuff gets blurrier, and you can control where the viewer is looking by that. You don't want to have like noise everywhere, details everywhere. You really want to have some areas that are just softer. Like, you don't want them to feel like they're blurry. You just want to make it should still feel like nice and organic. Otherwise, it's going to feel like way too stylized. But just make sure that there are areas of rest, basically. And these are still spheres. Like, these haven't even been retopologized, because the topology for a sphere kind of works for this, because it's like circular. So this kind of works still, actually. It's pretty rough, but it works.
Mush them out, subdivide, and you're good to go.
Yeah, it is really important when you're doing this that the topology is actually supporting what you're doing. If this here was like purely triangular, it would be much harder to actually do.
Also, just keep in mind that, we have more full-length and in-depth courses, tutorials like this over at FlippedNormals.com. If you're more hungry for this type of stuff, with a lot more commentary and in-depth explanations, there's a lot of tutorials there covering these kinds of processes.
Yeah, we made one recently, which is it was how to sculpt Frankenstein's monster. The tutorial isn't called that, but it's the thumbnail is that, so you can easily find that, where we cover basically how to do this kind of character in all real time, all narrated. We also have a course as well you might be interested in called Introduction to Sculpting, which covers kind of everything Morten and I know about sculpting. We try to put our brains together and really get everything down. So a lot of the fundamentals are covered in the Introduction to Sculpting course. So we have a lot of really cool courses on sculpting on FlippedNormals.com.
You can see here there's a lot of emphasis on building up the skin layer right next to where we have these outgrowths or outcrops almost of mushrooms. And it's a great way to integrate them better into the neck. And I mean, you could overdo it to really emphasize that when one of these mushrooms protrudes out of the neck, for example, you get a lot more skin growth to have these nasty lumps, for example, or streamline it a little more, make it sleek, but just indicate that it at least comes from somewhere. It doesn't just magically pop out of the skin.
Yeah, this is a big issue with particularly like student sculpts, is that people who are new to sculpting, is that things are not motivated by the real world. You just have shapes that you think are kind of cool or directly copied from reference without thinking about how it is actually work in real life. In this case here, these things here, they're not just sticking out of the body from a pure surface point of view. They're properly going deep into the body. There is a whole like ecosystem of stuff happening inside of this guy. And you just happen to see the tip of it, but you want to feel like the whole thing is there.
I think that's why the zombies are the way they are. They're just pissed all the time because they're in so much pain. They actually just want help, but that's people will misinterpret it as they're trying to kill us.
Yeah, just going over the whole model. I really can't stress how important it is to go over the whole model. It's definitely a specific sculpting style to this. Like, this is my way of doing it, where I do cover the whole model. There are some people who have like a soft treatment and rely more on textures. But at least regardless, you need to not have any soft areas or untouched areas. That was a problem at some point with this sculpt as well, that some of the fungal bits, they were just entirely untreated. Like, they didn't look smooth. They just looked like they were like store-bought cookies or something. Like, they were just straight up completely soft things just sticking into it instead of these like nice organic shapes.
Yeah, if we rewind a little bit to what I said earlier about leaving certain parts softer versus other parts with more detail, it's important to think about as well, though, that it still has to be within the same range of like detail level. It can't just be something is really soft for no reason and something is really not soft. detailed, because then that'll stick out even more. And then all of a sudden you've created a separate focal point from what you actually want the user to look at, or not the viewer to look at.
And then it's alphas time. All the alphas here, they come from the FlippedNormals face kit. This is a kit which has like really cool, like specific alphas for the face. And I find that usually you can get away with using like one a lot, rotate around a lot, and you can get a lot of variation. Like the goal for this guy here was more of a concept sculpt. So it wasn't like this was 100% thought out. It's more like it should feel like leather, or like really heavy leathery skin. But just doing this works really well. But this only works because the mid frequency is solid. This here would not work if you skip this step.
It's so interesting if like doing an experiment where you keep everything on layers, but you have your primary shape, your shapes, your secondary shapes, sort of that mid frequency, do that on a layer. And then once that is done, do all your alpha work on a third and separate layer. Disable the mid frequency, and then you can really see the importance of that layer.
You see this often on texturing, and this is essentially texturing what we're doing now. It's a very fine stage where you can have tilables going across a whole model, and in certain areas it feels like it's tiled. Like you can clearly see the tiling, and in other areas you can't see it at all because the mid frequency is so good. So just going over the whole thing now we're introducing a second alpha. So keeping it quite simple, you're getting coverage with one alpha, and now this is more like pores and such. And then this comes from the actual skin kit. The skin kit is a bit different. The face kit is exclusively face alphas, and the skin kit is a combination of like leathery skin and some pores and all sorts of different stuff. So this here is a really cool alpha just for making sure it feels a bit like more leathery, like heavy leather. So alphas are really important. Like, you could of course do some of this in like in Painter or Mari if you're texture painting this, but I prefer to do particularly this kind of stuff in ZBrush because I really control it. You can of course do more high-res stuff in texturing as well properly later on, but now I really control the skin. Like these kind of blisters and the pimples as well now. This is one of these alphas when I made the skin kit. This took like actually a minute to do because it's just a plane with like little pimple sculpted on top of it. But it's one of the ones I use the most just because it adds so much variety on top of skin.
That's one thing I just want to jump in on there is an alpha. I think this is something that people overlook. An alpha that protrudes instead of going into the skin. A lot of people associate alphas with scaly skin or pores, those kinds of details that, you know, go into the skin, but actually doing the opposite really creates a nice amount of detail, and you don't need a lot of it to create some variation in it to really help you break up the other alphas.
And then we're just going over, again, the whole model. We're not really showing the whole thing here because it would take another 10 hours. But essentially just going over parts of the model and balancing this in as well. And just refining it, going over actual clay buildup now with a very low intensity and just balancing things here. So we're reaching the end of the sculpt now. And in total, this is like 3.5 hours, like we mentioned before. And it's really fun to just be able to like doodle around with this kind of stuff. And I had tons of fun with this one. This is not the last you'll hopefully see of this sculpt on the channel. We'll most likely do a texturing video as well, which I'm very excited about.
Oh, yes.
So thank you so much for watching, and let us know what you think about the sculpt, or if you want to see, if you have any more requests for like these kind of gnarly zombie style characters, we would love to hear that as well. Or if there was something particularly useful in the video, let us know what you thought about that, and we'll see you in the next one.
And as always, remember to head over to FlippedNormals.com where we have thousands of tutorials, assets, everything ready for what you need for your projects.